As a leader, we have to start with a clear and shared narrative of what's the market and what's our situation in the market and what's the problem to be solved or the job to be done. If we don't know what problem we're solving or we don't know who we're solving it for, we can do all these other steps and they will not move the needle on our ultimate goals.
If you've ever felt like your team is working harder than ever, but not really getting anywhere, it might not be an effort problem. It might be a clarity problem. Welcome to How Leaders Lead. I'm David Novak, and every week I have conversations with the very best leaders in the world to help you become the best leader you can be. My guest today is Hayden Brown, the CEO of Upwork. Now, if you aren't familiar with Upwork, they help companies find and hire top freelance talent. And leading in that space, Hayden has real expertise on two topics every leader is talking about right now: remote work and AI. You'll hear her insights on both, and they're terrific, but I also want you to listen to how Hayden creates clarity for her team. If you want to cut down on confusion and give your team more direction and confidence, you're in the right place. Here's my conversation with my good friend and soon to be yours, Hayden Brown. Now, I understand that you have actually learned a lot about how to run your business by studying dating sites. Tell me about that.
A big function of what we do at Upwork is, connecting businesses from the Fortune 100, companies like Microsoft, Airbnb, Cloudflare, all the way down to your local mom and pop company. We connect them with the most in-demand talent in the world. And of course, that's a large part of matchmaking. That's really where we're kind of finding the exact match for not just the company, but the hiring manager, the project, the specific issue that they're trying to solve, and going into our tremendous talent pool to find that person. So there are a lot of analogies to dating sites and kind of matchmaking services generally. And certainly we always try to pull from the best to figure out how we do that matching better and better every day for our customers.
What do you think has been the biggest insights you pulled from the dating sites that you've transferred over?
I think one thing that makes dating sites an interesting analogy for us is, unlike e-commerce, where someone can come into a website and kind of browse a bunch of products, and then, many people could order that same product. They have thousands of that product on inventory. In the world of dating sites and the world of Upwork, every person is unique. There's no two people that are the same. There's no two, orders you could make of the same thing through our platform. And so we really look at how dating sites kind of bring forward the uniqueness, the specialness of every person, and find those very specific attributes that become part of the matching algorithm to get the right person to that individual.
Tell me about the origin of Upwork and what it is today.
We were founded about 20 years ago, really through two very good childhood friends who grew up in Greece, and one of them moved to the US. And he really wanted to work with his good old friend from Greece who was still back in that country. And yet he found in the early 2000s, it was not easy to do this. And in fact, his employer was pushing back and saying, well, we don't know this person. And how do we trust them? And how do we know they're doing real work for us? And that really led him and his friend to start Odesk, which was basically a way to connect remote talent together with a trusted kind of paradigm where there were things like screen captures, hourly work guarantees on both sides, and all of the infrastructure to make remote work safe, secure, and appetizing for both businesses and talent. So that was the early story of our business. We've gone through a ton of chapters since then, merged with our arch rival Elance and become Upwork in 2015. But really, this is a business that's, I think, at the beginning of the next huge journey. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But AI is changing everything to do with work. And we're certainly at the forefront of that, both with our product and for our customers.
Well, there probably isn't a company in the world that knows more about remote working and how to make it work than you. And I can't wait to really get into that as we go through along. But I'm going to ask you lots of questions about how you're leading Upwork. But I'm going to take you back, and what's a story from your childhood that shaped the kind of leader you are today?
I've been an entrepreneur since I was a really little kid. And the story there was, I grew up in this small town in Massachusetts, a blue collar community. Everyone knew everyone. And when I was 6 years old, my older brother was paralyzed from the neck down very suddenly. He's fine today, but he got this rare autoimmune disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome and suddenly was in the hospital for 6 months. And there I was, this little kid, loving and idolizing my brother and trying to figure out, what can I do for him? How can I make his life better when he's in this situation? And I got this idea because he was a huge car nut that when he got out of the hospital, I wanted him to come home in a stretch limousine. Like this was the thing I wanted to do with his friends inside, this big surprise, this big moment. And yet my allowance wasn't going to cover that. Like I had no way to fund that type of car rental. So I got started collecting bottles and cans, turning them in to the recycling center, getting 5 cents each. And thousands of cans later, I had enough money to pay for the surprise limo trip for him home. But what I really got from that wasn't just like the joy of seeing him in that experience. I realized how powerful it was to have earned money as like a little kid to be able to actually do something with it that really made someone else's life better. And that led me to go on and get a paper route. I was probably the youngest in my town to do that, to start a small business called Hayden's House Cleaning. I went around the neighborhood doing chores for people. I went on, started a summer camp for local kids. Like all of these things were important to me. But the through line was that early experience where I saw the good that I could do as an entrepreneur and seeing my parents who were nonprofit people and were working in communities around the world. We moved to Nepal when I was 11. We lived in Kathmandu, and they taught me the importance of not just doing work, but doing work with a purpose, doing work that really has a positive impact on people's lives, which is what they dedicated their lives to. And so that whole experience led me to want to be in business and create new things, create new products, but do it in a way that really tied back to personal impact, human impact. And that's really one of the big reasons I'm at Upwork today.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. And you lived in Nepal. What was the biggest thing you took out of that experience?
You know, about a year after we had moved to Nepal, I remember my first trip back to the US. So I was 12 years old. I got off the airplane. Within a few hours, I found myself in a US supermarket, probably a Stop and Shop in Massachusetts. And I'll never forget the kind of wonder that I had walking down the aisles and seeing 12 brands of toothpaste, 55 cereal types, like all of this abundance that previously I had just taken for granted growing up in the US. But now having been overseas for a while and seeing obviously such a different level of access and opportunity in Kathmandu, I realized as Americans, we are so privileged and we have so much access and things that we just take for granted. The rest of the world would, literally move night and day and like do anything to access. So that was a huge wake up call for me, really seeing that disparity and understanding firsthand the privilege of being an American. It felt like I was born with a lottery ticket because of that, and starting to figure out how can I help others in the world have access to this incredible opportunity that we have here in the US.
That's so great. People always ask me what my biggest break is, and I always tell them that I was being born in the United States of America and the son of Charles and Jean Novak.
Right?
It sounds like you have the same kind of belief that I have on that. And you go to Princeton and you graduate there, great school, and then you start up your career at McKinsey. When you think about leadership and making an impact, what did you learn by being a consultant?
I'll share this lesson with you. I don't know how appealing it will be to people, but actually it was such an incredible experience to be 21, 22 years old and asked to go in and work with some of the biggest companies in the world on core strategic problems that they were struggling with, that they did not have answers to. And that it was exactly why we were there as a firm and why I was being asked to do analysis or research or prepare a presentation that summarized various things. And what I really saw from that is it demystified business and business leadership for me. It made me see that even the people at the top, the most admired and successful people in the world, they too have questions. There's things where they need help. There's things that they don't understand or don't know how to do and could benefit even from someone straight out of college coming in and providing some information or perspective that they needed. So I think for me, that really opened up this idea that like anyone can be successful in business. We can all have a shot at it. And there's nothing special or unique about people who are already very successful. Like they got there through a hard lessons learned, but also are still learning every day. And that journey is never done.
And you were in this huge company, Microsoft, for a while. What did you glean from that experience that you've taken with you to Upwork?
Culture is everything. I was at Microsoft at a time when, there was that famous cartoon of like the different divisions pointing guns at each other because it was very fraught internally and there was a lot of internal competition. And yet I was privileged enough to join a team that was nothing like that. We had this small team that was kind of this ninja force, first working on M&A and strategy for the online business, which was this new thing at the time. and then going on and working on the biggest corporate strategy deals in the company's history, including things like the $40+ billion acquisition bid on Yahoo, the investment in Facebook, et cetera. And I saw that the culture of our team, which was so different than the broader culture of Microsoft, was really a huge motivator for me and a reason I stayed and did that work and just loved it and grew so much. Whereas once I realized I wanted to go into product management and do something else with my career, I knew going into the rest of Microsoft at that time in that culture was just not appealing at all. And so I've carried that with me and thinking about how do I build at Upwork the right culture that really attracts and retains, that gets the best out of people and is not political, is not, discordant internally, but really has us all moving in the same direction.
And when you think about culture at Upwork, what do you think is the single most important behavior that you're really trying to drive that'll get results?
We have a value called build and break fearlessly. And we have a number of company values. We have 5 total values, but this one is the one that I think really animates our culture and our reason of being the most, because we're a company that's built to break the status quo, to create possibilities for people and businesses that did not exist before and would not exist without our platform. So we need to be fearless every day, examining what needs to change, not just in the ecosystem outside and where we're trying to influence, stakeholders, customers, et cetera, but how do we need to build and break our own culture or our own ways of working or our own practices to actually achieve these goals for our customers? So this value for us cuts very deep and shows up in all aspects of our work. And is, I think, the thing that keeps us innovating at the edge of kind of the comfort zone and kind of pioneering our space in a way we could not do if we weren't so anchored on this value.
When you're talking to your team about the importance of break and build, what's your favorite story you tell?
There's so many. I mean, we just had a huge announcement on Tuesday, which was around this new business unit and brand we launched called Lifted. And we created this business through 2 acquisitions, plus our own existing enterprise business put together in this new structure. And I will say this is probably the biggest build and break fearlessly moment that we've had, because this required us not just to do acquisitions or change our product or change our sales strategy. It actually caused us to restructure our business and create this unit and kind of completely change our operating model in order to be able to serve our customers the way we knew they needed to be served. And so this one, I think, is a great example of how we went deep inside, not just outside, in terms of how we apply this value and really did the hard work to set us up for this next great chapter.
And as I understand it, when you joined Upwork, you were the head of product. What does head of product mean in a company like Upwork? What'd you do?
Yeah, so I joined the company in 2011, actually as a product manager. I found the head of product at the time was willing to take that bet on me transitioning from strategy and M&A and this other part of my career into actually being a builder. And then I grew up to be the head of product and then ran marketing before becoming CEO 5.5 years ago. But what I saw with being in product was this was such an amazing through line between really understanding customer needs very deeply and then being analytical and focused about how to action those needs and also being very creative in terms of solutioning, design, product development. And then, of course, closing that feedback loop by seeing what happens when you ship those products, how customers engage with it, how they respond, and then using that, of course, to come back to the beginning of the process all over again. So I loved how I got to be so front and center with customers, understanding their problems, and then applying them directly into changes in our business to address those problems.
One of the things that I think is the case, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a big perception of being this company that hires freelancers for creative projects, but yet you've expanded over time to human resources, IT, finance. How challenging was that for you to take people with you to broaden your offerings?
This happened really naturally for our platform, actually. We started with a really strong foothold in technical work. So we had a lot of Eastern European talent and others around the world doing web and mobile software and application design, all of that work kind of in the early 2000s. And then you're right, we also had this very big stronghold with designing creative work. But what we saw is customers would come in, they'd have something in mind like build a website, but that was not something that just a designer or a developer could do in isolation. They needed design, development, marketing, they needed the full spectrum of skills to execute these bigger projects. So very naturally, they started looking for and finding talent on our platform that drove that flywheel, where now we have over 130 categories of work, 250,000 AI specialists globally. I mean, and the composition of our marketplace continues to shapeshift based on client demands, which is like an amazing aspect of our marketplace.
And, here you are now, you're the leader in the industry, but you have companies like Fiverr and others who are trying to do the exact same thing or even better. How do you think about competition?
We stay focused on solving our own customers' problems. And of course, we look at what others in the marketplace and the ecosystem are doing, but we have such a unique solution that actually no one has replicated. There's no one that does what we do. We do complex, large project work. We have deep relationships being fostered between clients and talent on our marketplace. This is not small transactional stuff or throw it over the wall to somebody talented. So, our distinct value proposition and kind of market positioning is something that we see as a huge asset that we can continue to expand on with things like our AI features and what we're doing there, with things like this enterprise expansion, what we're doing there. And we see ourselves bringing to the market solutions that no one else has, and frankly, are really disrupting some of the legacy players who've been around for a long time, but aren't tech enabled, don't have marketplaces, don't have the set of talent and other capabilities that we have.
And so how do you stay in touch with the voice of the customer and balance giving them what they're telling you they need versus giving them sometimes things that they don't even know that they need?
It's a great question. I mean, we talk to customers every single day. I mean, we're on the phone, on Zoom, in person. I do an AI customer council every month where I gather customers who are focused on AI and are using our platform for AI and talk to them about what's current and on their minds. So we have a ton of these channels for getting that feedback. But you're right, David. One of the things I think is critical about a product manager and about a product company is we can't just build what we're asked to build. We have to go beyond that and have a bigger vision for where we're headed that customers may not even fully grapple with yet. They may not even be there yet, but we've got to be building that vision and making it real for them. So we also do a lot internally in terms of putting stakes in the ground around how we see the market evolving in the next few years, where things like AI will transform our opportunity, visioning that out, and then building a roadmap that is giving incremental wins to customers along the way. So they're seeing those benefits. We're not waiting until that big reveal, but we're building towards something that once we get there, everyone will look back and go, this is totally different. This is totally transformational.
Yeah, I want to get into how you're leading in the world of AI because there are very few people doing it as well as you guys are doing it. And but you spent almost 10 years at Upwork before becoming the CEO. Not many rise to that position of CEO, being at the top of the organization. If you had to pick one thing that really was the key driver of your own personal success as a leader, what do you think it would be?
I think clarity is probably the most important thing if I look back. And at every step of the way, I really focused on bringing clarity to hard problems that we didn't know how to solve or hadn't resolved yet. Also bringing clarity to what's the actual situation in the business. Because as a leader, we have to start with a clear and shared narrative of what's the market and what's our situation in the market and what's the problem to be solved or the job to be done. Then we have to articulate that vision of what could it be? What are we striving towards? Where are we trying to get to? And then the third thing is executing that plan, building and mobilizing the plan and the people to get there. So for me, it's always started with clarity. If we don't know what problem we're solving or we don't know who we're solving it for, we can do all these other steps and they will not move the needle on our ultimate goals.
And, what you're really talking about is the first responsibility of leadership, which is to define reality, the reality of the workplace, and then create these innovative solutions. Can you share an example of where you provided clarity on a really complex problem that really helped the trajectory of your company?
So in January of 2023, basically 2 months after ChatGPT had started to land on the scene, we sat as a leadership team and had a discussion about what did AI mean for our business. So, if we remember at that time, 2 months in, tons of open questions, plenty of healthy skepticism. There was a raging debate within our own team of, should we try to act on these kind of new technologies? Should we be incorporating them into the roadmap that we just built for that year? We just finished that whole planning process. Or do we wait and see? And there were advocates on both sides. That was a moment where I felt it was critical to step in and really have a strong voice and clarity around my view, which was this technology will change everything. We have to be a first mover, not a last mover here. We can't wait to see what others are doing. And the only way we're going to be successful is if we get our hands dirty and start to learn by doing. Now, at the same time, we couldn't just throw out our whole roadmap and start over again because we had a ton of goals to achieve. We knew a bunch of problems we needed to solve with existing capabilities. So what we did was isolate a small team to basically go off-site, essentially, in our kind of virtual mode, and just focus on the question, how would we build Upwork today? And what would it look like if we built it premised on an AI foundation? And that work and that team came back with some incredible insights, huge inspirations for us from a vision standpoint in terms of putting stakes in the ground of where we were going in the medium term. And then we gradually pulled pieces of that into the roadmap and started to build kind of chunks of that idea as part of our AI strategy. But that was a defining moment for us in terms of making that pivot and really committing to something that at the time, there was still a lot of question marks about.
Yeah, you took this big swing to basically what you guys describe, which I love this, is refound Upwork. And as an AI company, when others hesitated, how did you get the personal courage to make that call?
I think I faced a lot of tests over the many years, not just leading this business, but also just, rising up through a number of roles. And there was one formative experience for sure that happened, during when the outbreak of the Ukraine war started in February of 2022, where I think for me, that was actually for our business a significant crisis. We had 10 to 12% of our talent globally in the war-torn region. We had 12% of our own team internally that we work with also in that region. So we had internal exposure, we had customer exposure, our revenue was at risk, like all of these things. And most importantly, I was faced with the ethical question to some extent of, do we continue to operate in Russia and Belarus or not? And there were advocates from our customers on both sides, advocates internally on both sides. Ultimately, we were the first company in our space that made the decision to suspend operations in Russia and Belarus. And that was an agonizing decision. Through that, I think I really learned and felt that adage that it's lonely at the top, because there was no one who could tell me with any intelligence like what really needed to happen. And only I had the information and perspective to make that really tough decision for our customers who were directly impacted. Our platform is a lifeline for so many of them. And so turning it off in a certain market is extremely risky and goes against kind of our value system. At the same time, we knew we couldn't operate and deliver our brand value and our purpose in these markets, given sanctions and changing conditions on the ground that just made it untenable. So this was a very difficult choice, but I think going through that and realizing the full responsibility that I had to our customers and making that decision with clarity early on so that they could all make their own decisions going from there and we could continue to operate effectively as a team was essential. So I think it's been moments like those, David, that really, kind of tested us and our leadership and our cultural fabric and me in terms of making a bold and clear decision early. And I've always seen that those types of decision-making moments play out better when you can be clear and move fast and make a good decision versus wait for more information, et cetera.
Hey everyone, it's Kula from How Leaders Lead. And if you've watched our podcast for any number of episodes, you probably know that a common theme from all of the great leaders we interview is that they are active learners. They have this commitment to continuing to learn and grow so that they don't stay stagnant and so that they continue to see success in their leadership and in their life. This theme of active learning is so important, and it's what David's latest book, How Leaders Learn, is all about. It's all about helping you develop that skill of active learning so that you too can continue to see success in your leadership and in your life. The book is really entertaining. It pulls stories from some of our greatest podcast guests and pairs those stories with insights that you can incorporate into your leadership and into your life right away. Grab How Leaders Learn on Amazon or wherever books are sold. And I think you're really going to love it. You feel David's personality through the pages and through his storytelling. And it's a really powerful way to level up your leadership.
AI is something every leader is really struggling with right now, or trying to get better, making it core competence for themselves and for their organization. What are you personally doing to up your game in the world of AI? How have you gone about learning about it so that you can lead?
I spent a lot of time myself just using these different tools. I'm a big chat GPT user. I experiment with Gemini a lot. I haven't had as much success with that. And I look at it and test out kind of category specific tools. So I'm not a developer, but I will watch tons of videos of how people are using tools like Cursor, V0. Of course, I talk to our own team all the time about this because we are using those tools internally. But as things come out, I'm constantly kind of reading, experimenting, watching, and participating in keeping my own AI skills sharp because I have to roll that model out for my team. No one in my company is going to believe that I'm serious about AI unless I'm showing up, using these tools, pushing on them where they're not using the tools, et cetera. Of course, we also have some programmatic things in place. We started an AIification program where we have a bunch of initiatives that are really focused on, targeting and unlocking this value. But personally, I feel I need to champion this both by doing and showing up with our teams to really advocate for our AI adoption.
Has it been a challenge for you to take people with you in the company to get behind this movement, or has it been something that people have easily gravitated to? Because we're obviously changing old habits by getting used to this.
Totally. And we've seen everything internally. We always had kind of this cohort of early adopters who were, leaning in, advocating. We've bought 2 AI companies in the last 2 years. So that's brought in a lot of super forward-leaning AI talent, including our head of AI who came in from one of those acquisitions. But you're right. There's also a long tail of other people who've been worried or skeptical or feel like maybe they don't have permission to use these tools. So we make it a constant habit. Every week we're talking we have a weekly kind of mini all hands meeting. We're talking about and showcasing how people internally are using these tools. We've created workshops and webinars and now really communicated to everyone that the expectation is they are using these tools. So it has taken, in some places kind of the snowball needed to start rolling before speeding up, but now it feels like it's moving really fast in terms of executing on this opportunity and getting everyone in the company involved in it.
How important has it been for you to make it clear to everybody that this is a bus everybody's got to get on?
It's my top priority. It has been so important because you're right. There's skepticism, there's fear. People worry, even in our company, about their jobs being replaced by AI. I mean, this is a widespread phenomenon. So I have had to be very clear. And it's one of those things like repeat until people are sick of hearing it. And I'm sick of hearing myself say it, but repeat what our goals are and really reassure people as well as push them and challenge them in terms of where we're going. And this is, I think, essential for every leader. It's not going to happen in the business without each of us really leaning in and driving this change.
You're obviously a leader who can clarify, and you've done that many, many times. You're a great communicator, and you have these obvious skills, and you're at the top of an organization, which I think is fantastic, and you're a great example for my daughter and so many others. Did you ever find being a female really inhibited your ability to take on opportunities or even get opportunities? And if so, how'd you work through it?
I used to be very naive on this topic. When I was 22 at McKinsey or Microsoft, I was thinking, it doesn't matter that I'm a woman. That's not going to hold me back. No one's going to penalize me for that. And of course, in the last 20 years, I've seen tons of instances where I'm underestimated, I'm looked over, I'm mansplained to constantly just because, people think, oh, she can't know what she's doing or she can't take this on. So of course, I've experienced that throughout my career. I think the thing that has been, really interesting as the CEO, I've really realized that in our culture, there's kind of 2 types of women leaders who are stereotyped. There's kind of the mom who's soft and fuzzy, but maybe a little clueless or can't make those hard decisions. And then there's, I'll call her the jerk, the person who's cold-hearted, doesn't care, just breaking glass everywhere. And I am neither of those things. I bring a lot of warmth and love and caring that's genuine for my team and our customers. I'm also hard driving and decisive and bold and analytical. And people don't know what to do with that. I think they often can only kind of look for or see one, not both of those things at best. So it's become clear to me that I need to do a lot to communicate, as you mentioned, and really show up and try to educate my team and our stakeholders in terms of who I am and what I stand for, because the stereotypes that people really fall into, especially for women leaders, just don't apply.
What specific advice would you give to a female that maybe you wouldn't give to a male that could help them, climb the ladder?
Unfortunately, a lot of women who are so capable, and the studies have shown this, hold themselves back from that next step because they feel like, they need to do a little more, prove themselves a little more or learn a little more or go do that other job before they do the job they want to do. And a piece of advice I give to a lot of folks that come to me and we chat is, if you're thinking about going and doing that thing, don't do the three things first. Like, go do that thing now. You're ready. You're capable. Go do it. That's what a lot of men do. They don't wait until, they have that perfect profile or capability. And I think that's something that as women, we can constantly push ourselves on because our culture doesn't necessarily foster that in us.
Yeah, I agree. And it's great to see that you're leading the way and showing people that it can be done in the very best of ways. So congratulations on that. And, your company provides a great service to your customers. And I was just curious, what advice can you give on how to balance between full-time employees and freelancers? And maybe you could use Upwork as an example.
We have about 3/4 of our workforce today is freelancers. And that's been true basically since we were born as a small startup. We've always built our workforce as hybrid. And what we see today in the environment more broadly is a shift where more and more companies are looking critically at their full-time employee staff and realizing the limitations of what that staff can do for them. Often those people in their current payroll don't know how to use AI tools, aren't maybe moving fast enough up the learning curve, don't have other critical skills as these businesses are moving in a very dynamic environment. So that trend is causing more companies to have a smaller core FTE group and a larger group of contingent, freelance, and kind of third-party vendors that they work with. And that, I think, is an enduring shift we're going to keep seeing more of. So for every company, I think the key is moving from a mindset of, in the past, like most leaders have thought like, oh, I hire or I do work with the unit of the FTE. That's like the unit of measurement. Like I need to add these FTEs or subtract these FTEs. That's how work is comprised. The shift for leaders is to say, these aren't FTE units. Now it's skills or projects or efforts. And once we break down the work to be more clear about what those boundaries and goals are, we actually may not need a big team of 10 FTEs. Maybe we could have 4 or 5 specialists who really focus on that project, and then we keep going with them or disband it based on what we find. And so it's a different mindset around kind of what the unit of work is, how you define and scope the work, and then of course going to this tremendous pool of freelancers, which is a $1.3 trillion economy in the US alone, to find that skilled talent that you probably don't have to be moving fast enough and most agile, in this current environment.
And how do you go about defining the scope of a job so that you can decide, okay, it's a full-time employee or it's a freelancer? I mean, do you have a process that you use to get at that?
We do. I mean, we start with really what's the goal here and what's the time frame in which we need to achieve the goal? And is this something that's going to endure beyond that or not? We also look at aspects, of course, that are around kind of compliance and how much control and direction do we have to give to this work, or is it more kind of autonomous and we can share context and then have experts go off and do some of this work for them? So these are two of the factors that we look at in figuring out, can we do this with freelance talent? But for us, David, basically every question kind of starts with the premise like, why can't you do it with freelance talent? Like that's where we always start, is like, this should be something we can do with a flexible team. And if we really push ourselves to say, in places where people want more headcount, like, is that necessary? And they really have a high bar to justify in order to make that happen.
That makes sense. And as I said at the top of the show, you've been leading in this remote work environment before people even talked about remote work environments. And you've been doing this a long time. And it's now the new normal for every company. What advice would you give others on how to navigate this well? How do you really be a company that knows how to lead a remote workforce?
The first thing is, I think too often people mistake a remote first or remote forward workforce with we don't get together in person. When in fact, our model has always been a combination of, yes, lots of fully remote team members, lots of flexibility in terms of when, where, and how people work, but we still have strong cadences of getting teams together so they really build not just business context, but also social context and relationships. And that is really a huge unlock for remote teams. They have to have that as a foundation. So remote teams have to have a lot of in-person touch points. It can vary based on the team and the work, but that's a key part of relationship building. And then you also need to be very clear about what are the remote work practices. So for example, in our company, in every meeting, cameras are on for every participant. And that is really the guiding light as just one example, kind of practically, of how we ensure people are like seeing and hearing from each other, able to read body language. It's not about just dialing on the phone. You have to be like physically present. Those are some of the things that we do in addition to like weekly touch points where you build culture. You've got to build culture with a remote team that's not in the office. And for us, that means things like a half-hour touch point every week where we can put our culture on display, showcase work that's happening, create context, and also let people see and hear about things that are happening across the business that they're not hearing about when they're not in an office, which is what most of our team, is. So those are some of the things that really have helped us build remote culture and remote fabric. But every company has to approach this for like what's right for them.
We'll be back with the rest of my conversation with Hayden Brown in just a moment. Like Hayden, the co-founders of Warby Parker know how important it is to move fast. And for them, agility starts with fast, open, streamlined communication.
We found that to be successful and to grow quickly, right, information has to flow quickly within the organization. And similarly, it's got to flow quickly between the two of us, right? We need to model the behavior that we want to take place throughout the organization. So our office is an open layout. We sit right next to each other. In between meetings, we're often, sharing notes with one another. Sometimes we're the first people that we talk to in the morning and the last person we talk to at night. I don't know how much our wives love that. But again, to be a high growth company, right, you got to make quick decisions. And if those are going to be good decisions, they have to be informed decisions, which means information needs to travel quickly. And we think that our competitive advantage is having the best data, having the best information, and having that flow throughout the company across functional groups that are in other companies often don't talk to each other or don't even exist within the same company, right? And that's our competitive advantage. We have direct relationships with our customers because we sell direct to our customers through our stores and our website and our apps. So we're able to get all this customer feedback and data, and then we disseminate it quickly across the company, whether it's to eyewear design or our merchants or to the technology team or to the CX team or to the marketing team, right? And then we're able to sort of move nimbly and quickly.
Go back and listen to my entire conversation with co-CEOs Neil Blumenthal and Dave Gilboa, episode 181, here on How Leaders Lead. What have you learned about managing conflict in a remote environment? You talked about the body language and, but how do you wrestle tough things to the ground in a remote environment? So it's not just a telling kind of back and forth mode that way.
Two things have really helped us. So one is the in-person relationship building, which again is about dinners. It's about going on hikes. Like when teams get together, they focus on that. That social fabric then builds the psychological safety that people can have conflict with each other and feel like that's okay. And also when they hear, a challenge or a pushback from a colleague, they can know, oh, that's coming from a place of positive intent because we talked over dinner and he's a super nice guy and he's only saying this because he really thinks it's better for the business. So let's hash it out. So positive intent and psychological safety comes from that relationship building. The other piece of it, which I talk a lot with our executive team about, is you can't have like one dimension of communication. It can't be only scheduled meetings. When there's a conflict, we have an agreement that we will resolve things quickly. So we'll turn around, we'll get on the phone right away, or we'll set up an in-person meeting right away, or we'll take action so that these things don't fester and become, out of proportion or bigger conflicts. It's about use whatever tool necessary to kind of bottom this out immediately and don't let it wait. So never let a conflict roll into the next week, for example. Resolve it by Friday.
Maybe that's part of your build and break approach. You're building the culture and you have to break down the barriers when you see them.
Totally. And that's why as a product manager, I love this job. Like I now get to build the company, not just the product. And to me, that is everything.
Speaking of that, you were a product manager. Now you're the CEO. You run every function. How did you broaden yourself?
I'm a huge learner and I'm hugely curious. So I'm always asking other people for tips, advice, input, reaching out to broaden my network and really learn about the things that are the next kind of challenges in the role. So I had the good fortune of doing a lot of product marketing, some other things before I became the CEO. But I've also realized there's also nothing like trial by fire. And sometimes you can prepare, you can learn, but then you just have to go and do it. You have to get into it and you learn a lot by doing. That would be like my first earnings call. I had never led an earnings call before, but I prepared, I practiced, I kind of thought through it. And actually then I took like a giant risk and surprised the street with some announcements they weren't expecting and it paid off. It totally worked. But, at some point you have to kind of set aside this idea that everyone else knows better, kind of like what I learned at McKinsey, like everyone else is more expert. I learned, everyone's kind of making it up. And so it's okay to learn, be smart, start with first principles, and then go and apply that knowledge and then rinse and repeat.
Now, you're a very confident person, but has there been a time where you really had some significant doubt? And if so, how'd you work through it? Can you share that?
So 2 months into the job as the new CEO, and mind you, I stepped into a context that was, we were about 1 year post-public. Our stock price had been faltering. Investors had some questions. I was put in as this new CEO. They didn't know yet. And I had a clear idea of what we needed to do with the business. But some of the things I felt we needed to do were very risky. So I laid out my strategy and my plan to the team. But part of that was saying, we have to act like we're in wartime. We have to work a lot harder. The bar for excellence is now going up. And this is what I'm asking of and expecting of you. And the thing that I wanted to do that I debated was I actually wanted to make sure everyone at the company who wanted to be there was there and committed to this new plan and this level of effort. And that anyone who was not intending to be there or did not feel like this was a good idea for them was out the door. So what I wanted to do was this thing, we ended up calling it the Graceful Leave Program, where we offered everyone a severance package after I had shared this new strategy and these new expectations and said, every single person, if you don't want to be part of this, here's a check, here you can go now. But the question for us was, what is this going to do? Are we going to have 20 people left at the end of this? Who's going to stay and who's not? Is this too risky? And also, when do we do it? Because I was 2 months in and there was a lot of discussion. Maybe we should do it at the end of Q1 or Q2. Well, it turned out we did it in February. We executed this plan. We offered people severance. A number of people took it. We also, helped coach some people out that maybe were not a good cultural fit. So it was a huge actual win for us. But what I realized was the pandemic hit in March. And if we had not moved fast and executed on that in February, we would have been in a very different situation in terms of executing that type of transformation of our workforce and our business during the pandemic, when it was like a no-no to fire anybody. So I had debated and deliberated the time frame. I got some great input from people that were like, hey, we know you want to move fast, just do it in February. And I did it. And looking back, that was such a good decision. And that gave me a lot of confidence in future decisions about moving fast, not equivocating, and just going for it, even when the outcome was very much unknown.
Yeah. Well, the graceful leave, that's another example of where your clarity really paid off. You said, this is where we're going. I'm excited about where it is. I think there's huge potential there. But you gotta believe it too. And if you believe it, we're together. If not, you can leave graceful. That's a pretty good example. And you mentioned COVID, and you became CEO right before the pandemic. How did that accelerate your learning just on remote work? What have you learned about remote work because of COVID?
It's a great question. Because we were a hybrid and remote-oriented company before COVID, we always had a 4-1 model in our offices, 4 days in the office, 1 day remote. And then we had this extensive team of freelancers predominantly who were nowhere near our offices. So we had this huge remote workforce. It was easy for us to flip the switch and go fully remote when COVID happened. I did learn how hard it was for other companies and how much we could help and educate them with some of our practices. So that was a benefit. But I also learned, to my comments earlier, remote work, when it's fully remote and you can never get together in person, which was the case more or less for the first 1.5, 2 years of the pandemic, is very different than remote work when you can have these in-person touch points. And I think one mistake we made during COVID is, we grew the business significantly. Our top line nearly doubled or did double. Our employee base expanded significantly as well. But because we were already so good at remote work, we didn't think about incepting our team members that we were hiring with all of the practices, with the level of intentionality that we had in the past. Because in the past, people would just come to the office and be remote, and they kind of learn these things through the way our culture worked. They'd be in person sometimes, et cetera. Without those in-person touch points and without enough intentionality around what our remote work model was, we actually kind of backslid at periods of time where it was like, oh, this isn't as effective as it could be. So since then, we've really dialed our dials in terms of the intentionality, in terms of the communication around what our approaches are. But I think it was definitely interesting to see kind of through that period, some of the struggles that we ourselves had at moments because of our growth and because people didn't all understand how to work in our remote company.
Yeah, and nobody has a crystal ball, but if you could look out 5 years from now, how would you describe the remote work world?
It's going to keep getting better because the technology will improve. And I do think technology enablement is a huge driver here of whether remote work is successful or not. So I'm an optimist in that sense. I do think, though, at this moment, everyone is recognizing the value of in-person and trying to find that balance again, having many companies swung extremely remote. And I think that's going to continue. I think we're going to see more of these hybrid models where people have a mixed workforce of on-site and remote folks. But the technology enablement will mean the remote people can contribute and be participating at even higher levels than probably what we see today.
I've seen technology where it's like if you and I were sitting right across from each other like we're doing right now, I could basically put my hand into your screen and it's almost like we could shake hands. It's like, pick up an apple off your desk or whatever. I mean, it's amazing. Where do you see that going?
I mean, I am sure these things will continue to come kind of from the lab, into reality. That is the natural technology life cycle. And I think it's easy to underestimate how impactful they'll be. I'll give you one example. We, as a leadership team, decided to adopt we got the like Meta 3D glasses, and we did some of our team meetings during the pandemic through like a virtual reality setup. And most of it was actually like terrible because the technology wasn't very good and there were all kinds of issues. But one thing I remember clearly was the stereoscopic sound, where we could kind of talk over and with each other more naturally the way you are in a room versus on Zoom where it's kind of turn by turn talking and then people talk over each other and they both have to stop and it's kind of messy. Just that improvement actually made it feel like such a better, higher quality touch point for us as a team. So if you imagine that's just like one small innovation that can come to all of our remote work tools and then multiply it times these more dramatic things, whether it's kind of hologram type, in-person experiences like the one you're describing, there's a lot there. And again, I think that the exponential improvement of what remote can be based on that is huge.
This has been so much fun, and I want to have some more with my lightning round of questions. Are you ready for this?
I'll do my best.
Well, one thing I know is for sure we're going to get some clarity here. Okay. What are the 3 words that best describe you?
Bold, analytical, compassionate.
If you could be one person for a day beside yourself, who would it be?
I'd want to be one of my kids. I would love to be a child again and experience childhood, through their eyes and also see what kind of parents they think my husband and I are.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
I have this thing. I'm a stickler for setting goals with dates and then being clear with metrics using a framework called from X to Y by when.
Clarity again. Who would play you in a movie?
Can I say Idris Elba? Because he's just so awesome.
Perfect. I love it. How many languages do you speak?
2.2.
What's the point 2?
My Nepali used to be a lot better when we lived in Kathmandu, and now it's definitely degraded.
And what's your other language besides English?
Spanish. Oh, and I have a bit of Japanese too, so maybe it's 2.5.
What's the one thing you do just for you?
Drive fast with loud music and the windows down.
All right. If I turned on the radio in your car, what would I hear?
You would hear Gold Gun Girls, which is like one of my favorite songs by Metric, and probably some Taylor Swift. I'm still like the man, and You've Got to Calm Down. Those are some of my favorites.
Besides your family, what's your most prized possession?
Maybe my house. We designed that thing to be so purposeful for what we wanted.
Yeah, that's great. What's something about you few people would know?
I'm a huge design junkie. Like my close friends know this, but architecture and interior design, that's like my second life.
And what's one of your daily rituals, something that you never, ever miss?
Sun before screens. I always have to look at the sky before I turn on my phone in the morning.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. All right, we're out of the lightning round. Great job. And I just got a few more questions for you, and we'll wrap this up. I've heard you tell stories about the adventures your parents would take you on as a kid, and you lived in Nepal. And, how are you leaning into that same kind of adventure now as a parent?
It's really important to me that my kids feel like they're part of a world that's bigger than, where we are in California. We do an international trip minimum once a year with them so they can kind of see and experience the world. This year, I also took my 10-year-old to Ecuador on a one-on-one trip because I wanted her to see that and to have that one-on-one time with her. So travel for us is a big thematic where we're constantly getting out, and I want my kids to have that exposure. I'm not ready to be an expat with them yet, but I do want them to feel like they really are global citizens.
And what kind of leadership, because you're obviously an excellent leader, what kind of leadership do you try to take home with you when you're dealing with your husband and your family? And How do you look at leadership at home?
Leadership at home for me, David, is all about love. It's all about leading from a place of love. My biggest goal as a parent is for my kids to know they are unconditionally loved. It's not about grades. It's not about performance. Nothing is conditional about how much my husband and I love them. And so I'm constantly focused on peeling back any layers and just making sure they know how much they are loved.
And, you mentioned compassionate is one of the words you use to describe yourself, and compassionate, being kind. How do you balance that with just the tough-mindedness it takes to be a CEO? Like having a graceful leave policy, for example. I mean, that took some tough-mindedness.
Yeah. It can seem like these things are at odds, but I actually see them as interlinked because, in the example of that graceful leave policy, yes, we invited and asked some people to leave the business at that time because we knew they weren't a right fit or we wanted them to self-select and we wanted the existing people to like really opt in. But that's a compassionate thing to do, to give people choice and to give them agency and acknowledge that they have that agency and acknowledge that if they're not the right fit, this is not going to end well for them or for us anyway, even if we play it out a little bit longer. So I think a lot of these choices on the face can seem like they're not coming from a place of care and kindness. But, one thing I love is like letting people be free to go find greater opportunities somewhere else if they're not a fit here. And that actually is an act of love.
Hey, listen, every great company has a North Star. There's something that it's a noble cause. You go to work and you're not just going to work to make a paycheck. You're going to work to really make the world a better place. What's your purpose, Hayden? And how do you drive it deep in your organization?
We're very fortunate because we, as a business, have a purpose that is so evident in everything we do. Our purpose is to create opportunity in every era of work. We've done this for businesses and talent through the advent of, mobile, shifting to the cloud, social media, like all of these phases of work that have happened over the last 20 years. We've been right there helping our customers transform and meet those moments. So for us, that purpose around creating opportunity in every era of work continues to be fresh and relevant because work is constantly changing. And there's always more we can do to make work better for all the participants in it, which is it's a huge mission statement if you think about it that way. So we have this purpose. We drive it through. We show it in every all hands. We talk about it in every weekly meeting, how the work we're doing connects back to that purpose. And one of the ways it becomes very vivid is through customer stories and bringing customers in through video, through live interviews, et cetera, to talk about how that purpose has impacted them directly. And I think that is one of the things that energizes us all the most.
We started out this conversation by talking about dating sites and what you'd learned that you could apply to Upwork. And I'm actually interviewing tomorrow Whitney Wolf-Hurd, the head of Bumble.
Yep.
What question would you like to ask her if you could?
It seems like on the precipice of AI, a lot of the kind of prior models around dating and even companionship are changing in terms of both the tools that can be used to kind of facilitate matches and people actually looking for things from AI tools in terms of, relationships that they didn't even think about before, we wouldn't even have thought about in the past. So I'm really curious to understand, how is she seeing her business, not just in the next year or two, changed by AI, but what does it look like in 5 years? I think that would be an interesting prognostication.
All right, great. I'll definitely ask her that one. And thinking about the future, what do you see as your unfinished business?
Upwork feels like very unfinished business for me. We are at the beginning of unlocking a huge market and really changing work for so many more people. So this is like an incredible privilege and joy to work on this very unfinished business.
And what's one piece of advice you'd give to anyone who wants to be a better leader?
I think people see bold moves as somehow hard and they hold themselves back because they want to find some path that maybe doesn't seem as disruptive. But the clarity and the boldness and really facing what's the worst that could happen? We asked ourselves when we did this graceful leave, what's the worst that could happen? And we said, we'd rather be a tiny team of highly committed people than a big team of medium or not committed people. And I think asking yourself what's the worst that can happen can really unlock for you as a leader willingness to do these things that on the face of it maybe seem bold or hard, but once you think it through, it's like the obvious thing you would do.
Well, I can tell you, the best thing that happened to me today is this conversation. You are a tremendous leader. I'm so excited that people will get to learn from your insights and be able to hopefully up their game like you have continually throughout your career. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, David. This was a lot of fun.
It's probably easy to categorize clarity as just one more leadership skill you have to have. But Hayden shows us it's one of the most important tools a leader has. Without it, your team will miss opportunities and be less efficient. But to give your team clarity, you need more than good communication skills. You need curiosity to truly understand challenges they're facing. You need courage to step into tough conversations. And you've got to be willing to make bold decisions, especially when no one else is quite sure what to do. Hayden models that so well, and it's a big reason Upwork is able to succeed in a world that's moving faster than ever. So here's your challenge this week. Find one way you can clear up a situation for your team. Maybe it's a conflict that's been festering, a product that's been stalling, or a big decision that needs to be made, but there's confusion all around it. Step in and lead. Bring the curiosity and courage I know that you've got and give your people the clarity they need to move forward. So do you want to know how leaders lead? What we learned today is that great leaders create clarity for their teams. Coming up next on How Leaders Lead is Klaus Kleinfeld, former CEO of Siemens and Alcoa. So be sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss it. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of How Leaders Lead, where every Thursday you get to listen in while I interview some of the very best leaders in the world. I make it a point to give you something simple on each episode that you can apply to your business so that you'll become the best leader you can be.